Predicting the action of a muscle can be difficult. One of the best ways to think about how a muscle functions is by interactively using your body as an example. When possible, it is always a good idea to try to put one finger on one attachment point of the muscle and another finger on the same hand on another attachment point. Thus, by making movements in the muscles to bring those fingers closer together, the muscle has to contract, which will reveal the action of that particular muscle. For example, the levator scapulae muscle has an attachment point on the scapula and another attachment point on the first few vertebrae in the spine. The only way to get those two attachment points closer together when keeping the head still is through the elevation of the scapula, as shown here. Whenever it is impossible to use your fingers since the attachment points are too far apart, try to visualize the origin and insertion points of the muscle and think about what must happen for those points to come closer together. While it may be arduous to predict every function, it is likely that this method will reveal the major action of that muscle. It is also important to note that by visualizing the origin and insertion points of a muscle, one can see what joint the muscle crosses. This is important as well because when a muscle crosses a joint, it is going to have some sort of effect on how that joint moves. Looking at the direction of the muscle striations, or even the shape of the muscle, can also be helpful in determining how it functions in the body. Thus, every muscle in the human body will move the joint that it crosses in a manner that is consistent with its shape and direction of its striations. The rotator cuff consists of four primary muscles, including the supraspinatus, the infraspinatus, the teres minor, and the subscapularis. All of these muscles have unique shapes and they all extend from the scapula to the humerus, and they are also involved in rotating or moving the shoulder in some way. The supraspinatus has a medial attachment point in the supraspinous fossa of the scapula, hence its name, as well as a lateral attachment point at the greater tubercle of the humerus. The supraspinatus also seems to have horizontal striations compared to the other muscles of the rotator cuff. On the other hand, the infraspinatus has a medial attachment point in the infraspinous fossa of the scapula, and a lateral attachment point at the greater tubercle of the humerus. Both the supraspinatus and the infraspinatus are named after the depressions that they originate from, but they differ in shape, as the supraspinatus is a more cylindrical muscle, whereas the infraspinatus is more triangular. The teres minor muscle has a medial attachment point at the lateral border of the scapula, and a lateral attachment point at the greater tubercle of the humerus as well. Finally, the subscapularis has a medial attachment point in the subscapular fossa of the scapula, and a lateral attachment point at the lesser tubercle of the humerus. The teres minor and the subscapularis are both flattened triangular muscles, with the teres minor being smaller in comparison. The infraspinatus, the teres minor, and the subscapularis all have striations that are in a diagonal pattern, which reflect functions that are more closely related to the rotation of the shoulder. First off, by looking at the supraspinatus, with striations that are not as diagonal as the other three muscles and seem almost horizontal, its function likely does not involve rotation. By putting one of my fingers in the supraspinous fossa on the superior portion of the scapula, and another finger on the humerus, the only way to get those fingers closer together is to move my shoulder away from the midline. This means that the function of the supraspinatus muscle is in abducting the shoulder joint. The infraspinatus has diagonal striations, so it likely involves rotation of some sort. By putting one finger on the infraspinous fossa in the center of the scapula and another finger on the humerus, the only way to get those fingers closer together via rotation is through the lateral rotation of the shoulder joint. Similarly, the teres minor has the same direction of striations, but different attachment points, with one at the lateral border on the scapula and another at the humerus. Again, the only way to get those attachment points closer together is through the lateral rotation of the shoulder as well. Finally, the subscapularis has an attachment point on the anterior scapula in the subscapular fossa, and another attachment point on the lesser tubercle of the humerus. Since this muscle is on the opposite side of the other two muscles that laterally rotate, but it has similar attachment points, the only way to bring those attachment points closer together is through the medial rotation of the shoulder. It makes sense that this muscle has an opposite function of the other two muscles. Thus, to conclude, the functions of the four rotator cuff muscles are as follows. The supraspinatus is involved in the abduction of the shoulder joint. The teres minor and the infraspinatus are both involved in the lateral rotation of the shoulder joint. And the subscapularis is involved in the medial rotation of the shoulder joint. By looking at attachment points, striations, and shape, predicting muscle function is not as daunting as it may seem. Thank you.